Welcome back to the Retro Horror Academy. My name's Daniel Richardson, and tonight we're going to be looking at the year in horror 1931. I'm not gonna lie, I got two different feelings about tonight's show. One part of me is very much excited because we are now past the silent era. We are officially into talkies, and we're into the main clutch of the Universal monster, the golden era of the Universal monster boom. So that's fucking awesome. However, I think the Academy may have made a controversial decision in its ranking, and I feel like this is, we're starting off on a hot episode, kicking off the 30s, but I also feel like this is going to get a lot of hate from the outside. But you know what? The Academy is here, not for you so much as it is just for us. So, yeah. Let's get into it, shall we? Now, before we get started, let's talk about 1931 because it was a great year for horror. You know, movies that came out that year, you had Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, all Universal, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was a Paramount. Again, we talked about this last episode that, Universal kind of led the way for these, for this, horror wave right here. It really all started kind of with Dracula, and then once it became a huge success, everybody followed. And so the next couple of years is going to be huge for horror. And this would literally make major stars out of like Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, Frederick March. I mean, they all just became household names, and it was incredible. And it would launch their careers, especially in horror, because Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff would go on to be in several, not just sequels to the Universal horror franchise or not, but also to several Edgar Allan Poe films as well. They team up in a lot of those. So I mean, just a great start to the decade right here. Now, you know what we do on this show? We got 5 movies tonight that we're ranking from 1931, 5 horror films, if you will. But we always like to make the induction to the Horror Hall of Fame. So, who are we going to induct into Retro Horror Academy's Horror Hall of Fame class of 1931? I'm going to butcher his last name, and I apologize. I'll use his first name. His first name's a no. That's all you really need. But let's try this. Dante Alighieri. Is that right? We're going to call him Dante. So Dante, we know him for his Divine Comedy. More importantly, Dante's Inferno, which would go on to make. There was at least 2 films by this time of Dante's Inferno. One that came out in 1911, which we reviewed on this show, which was iconic. It literally was just very groundbreaking for its time. But then it would get remade again in 1924. Some of his writing has been used in other works, such as I'd always butcher this name too, but Majesty in Hell, the 1925 fantasy horror film that we covered on this show as well, which really liked it. And Dante, I mean, his spot in the Horror Hall of Fame is basically for, his words gave us the visuals for what we see today as hell. Like, everything you see in these movies, the words that he put on the page to put the picture in your mind, that is what almost everybody's interpretation of hell is. And for that, contribution alone, he deserves his spot in the Horror Hall of Fame. So, Dante, welcome to this prestigious club we have going here. Welcome to the Horror Hall of Fame. So let's get into it, shall we? We're going to just jump right into it. We're going to jump in with the number 5 horror film of 1931. And that movie is The Phantom. Mass killer stalking people inside of an old asylum. That sounds like an awesome fucking movie. We didn't get that, though. We didn't get that at all. Take a drink. I really need a co-host on this show so I can switch out and give me a drink whenever I want. Anyways, no, we did not get that film at all. This was, once again, everybody's jumping on the horror bandwagon, and this was Poverty Row jumping out here with this thing. I don't know. It's an old dark house type movie. Very similar to the Cat and the Canary, and that's to me is the number one old Dark House movie. I will always kind of refer to that. That's my prototype, if you will. I know there's been some before it, and there's going to be some after it, but for me, the Cat and Canary is the one. When this movie came out, it got okay reviews, but a lot of people kind of said the same thing. It just kind of it's very slow. They thought that the two main leads were miscast. Guns Williams or Gweens Williams. Oh, I can't think of the girl's name right now. I wrote down notes and I didn't write down the cast, but the main Arlene something, Arlene Ray or something like that. Arlene Williams. It doesn't matter. Either way, the two leads, the guy who plays Ace the reporter and his fiance. They said they were miscast, and I'll tell you right now, I don't know. Maybe they were. For me personally. And I think the Academy definitely agrees with me on this one because that's why it's so goddamn low on this thing. I think personally, the movie itself is just bad all around. So here's my issue with it. I know we just made this transition from silent films to the talkies. And I know, if you've ever seen the musical, I know it's kind of weird talking about musical in here, but the musical Singing in the Rain, the whole plot of that is literally these actors who are trying to transition from being these silent movie stars that they were into an era with sound. And just kind of the hilarious, misadventures they have just trying to, make that transition. I feel like this movie epitomizes all of that because it's so clunky. Like, we were talking about how with the Cat and the Canary, not just because of the old Dark House, just, in directing in general, the camera is very fluid. It moved around a lot, but didn't feel like it was moving around for the sake of moving around. Did not feel like style over substance. No, it enhanced what you were watching. This was just static shots. It felt like you were watching a stage play. And not just that, but it had that bad thing of like, I don't know, all the actors, they were kind of overacting a little bit, but it's almost like that kind of overacting like you see on the stage where they're trying to make sure that everybody can hear them in the back row, so they're just kind of like, hold up, what is happening now? Hey, what are you doing over there? There's a killer on the loose, I tell you. It's just a lot of that. The acting felt like it was more out of like an adventure movie, like especially this main guy who they said was miscast, which I guess maybe they're right. He seems like he's the kind of guy that comes out of like the adventure, the swashbuckling type of adventure stories you'd see from this era, from the serials, The reporter who's just like, I'll tell you, see, we're going to head down here and, it's going to be dynamite, just real fast talking, listen here, Buster, I'll tell you what's what, that kind of, thing. It felt like I was watching something like they're, a movie about treasure hunting or, got to rescue the princess from the evil king or, I don't know. It felt like something totally different than an actual horror film. Or even, at this point, horror's not even really a genre yet, but at this point it kind of is. Like, everybody knows, like, dark dramas or whatever you want to call them. And it didn't feel like that at all. The other thing was just, sorry, I'm going to crack one open here. The other thing was, a lot of the dialogue was just, and I'm not saying, maybe it is bad writing, which I'll get into that in a little bit, but it was just like the actual delivery of these lines were so bad, and it's like a lot of weird like pausing, like you hear like right now you could tell like the sound of these old talking movies, especially from the 30s and 40s, just the crackle, the hisses, the pops that you hear on the audio soundtrack in between talking, and so like you'd have these scenes where like these like three people on the frame on screen, and no one's talking. And then one guy will deliver his line. And then there's a good, without exaggerating, 3 to 4 seconds of just silence. So you're just hearing these awkward audio pops. And then the next guy will deliver his line. And again, it's like they're waiting. I don't know if they're like waiting for a crowd reaction or what, but it's just like this happens throughout the entire show. Sorry, the entire movie. Luckily, it's only like an hour long, but my God, it's a long hour. Like, this was a brutal hour to get to. This is honestly... Again, try not to exaggerate. This may have been the worst movie I have seen on here. It ranks up there with The Monster, but The Monster even, at least it had something kind of cool going for it, and it had Lon Chaney. This don't even have anybody in it that I recognize right now. Yeah, so you had a lot of, so everybody's dialogue was like that. Everybody just kind of waiting. And you'd have some people who just didn't deliver their lines good, like they just delivered them stiff and wouldn't. Then you had people who like delivered them in like over the top ways, and there's a lot of comic relief, but it's like it's not funny. The other thing was the writing itself was so bad. Like at one point, I mean, I guess I kind of figured it out, but I don't know. So it starts off with a prison break, and again, we're having these really bad lines of dialogue. Well, this guy breaks out of the prison and he jumps onto a train. So they're trying to shoot him off the train, and then a plane comes in and he gets away, and they're just like, "It's the Phantom," and I'm like, "Well, who's the Phantom? The guy who escaped, or the guy who is flying the plane?" Because to me, I'm thinking, if it's the guy who escaped, would you not have his real name? Like I know it's the 1930s or whatnot, but like, come on, you're not just using the alias. They never say his real name because they don't know who the Phantom is. So it's like, okay, it couldn't have been the prisoner then, right? It had to be the pilot. But then as the movie goes on, there's like two or three villains that just kind of pop up. You have one guy who is stalking around the property like he's a Phantom. He's got his face covered, with his cape or whatever, his cloak. And so you're just like, okay, that's the Phantom. But it turns out he's not. It's a totally different guy who's a doctor that was already established. So they knew who this guy was in the asylum. And they're like, hey, it's Dr. I forget the guy's name already. It's Dr. Andrews. And it turns out we know who the Phantom is. It's Dr. Andrews. It's like, well, wait a minute. He was already established. So like, is he I don't know. This movie was so poorly written. And on top of that, almost everybody kind of looked the same. Like everybody was just white and bland and boring. And like, I don't know. There's only a hand. Like he had one guy who looked like Robert Goulier. I don't know if you guys know who that is, but he was like a lounge singer turned pseudo actor. He was in the third Naked Gun movie. That guy, there's a guy that looks kind of like him, and he's like in the women, and they were all kind of in different outfits, so I can tell them apart. But yeah, like the actual men, they were all just white guys in suits and hats, and it was just like, fuck you. So I don't know. Yeah, the IMDb looked at the score. It has a current rating of 4.3, and that's clearly not good. So yeah, the Phantom. I'd say avoid it. It don't even feel like it's a horror film. And I know that's you can't say that for these early ones. 'Cause I know a lot of them were kind of bleeding into other genres, but this is just trash. This is garbage. This is boring. That's the thing. It's not even fun garbage. It's just boring and dull and slow moving. And it's only an hour, and it felt like so much fucking longer. Taking a drink. So we're gonna move on now to the number 4 horror film of 1931. I am talking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll, basically he's drinking this potion and it brings out his inner demons, his inner beast. It brings out Mr. Hyde. However, he can no longer control him as Mr. Hyde, starts controlling him more and more. So yes, we know the story. This is the most remade movie from this era, period. And they just keep making it. This is Paramount who brought this one out this time. So with this one, and you're going to hear this a lot with the next 2 to 3, movies on this list. I'm sure up until the code was put in place, but this is a pre-code, pre the Hays Code film. And of course, the code was basically, at this point, there was no censorship on these movies. However, the government and these fuckers were like, okay, so we don't want anybody to take over Hollywood. We want to police ourselves, so they enforced the Hays Code, which is basically just self-censorship, or they had a committee put together that would censorship this stuff. And for like the next, I don't know, 20 years, I think up until the 50s, they were very strict on what you could show, what you couldn't show, and everything else. But they eventually would kind of fade away, and we start getting a little darker and sexual oriented stuff, and whatever the case is. So but this is a pre-code movie, and you'll be hearing me talk about some of the changes that they had to make for these pre-code movies. So in this one, they again, this has been remade so many times, but they do add a new element. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure if this is in the book or not. Maybe it is. I don't know if it's original here, but we add another character, because up until this point, Jekyll has been, they actually call him Jekyll, and apparently that's kind of how it's supposed to be pronounced, but it just got stuck Jekyll. So everywhere else has always called it Jekyll. But apparently, like the dude who, Robert Louis Stevenson, when he wrote it, the dialect and the way you pronounce things in that town where he wrote it is because it's Jekyll. But yeah, it's Jekyll now. Anyways, in every iteration that we've covered, even on this show, up to this point, it's always been Dr. Jekyll. He's about to get married, and then he becomes Mr. Hyde. Shit goes bad, and then of course he dies, killing both him and Hyde together. Blah blah blah. But here we get a new girl added, and her name's Ivy, and she's a barmaid down at the local tavern, and very free spirited. Literally, she's definitely just banging anything that moves down there. And I'm not slut shaming. Hey, we need those kind of girls in our society. So she's down there. She's having a good time, as is her right. However, Dr. Jekyll sees her one night out, and of course, he's smitten with her. But he's trying to be a good boy because he's getting married soon. So he pushes it down. But when of course Jekyll comes out, or sorry, Mr. Hyde comes out, Hyde goes after her, and she's a very sexual character. And then a lot of the stuff with Hyde in her, I mean, it's heavily implied that they're definitely fucking. And so in a 30s movie, certain people just weren't ready for that yet. So yeah, when the Hays Code finally came out, some of these scenes were shaved off or shortened or kind of retooled to kind of lessen the sexual content, if you will. The makeup here is very unique. They give Mr. Hyde a more ape-like look, like he looks more simian than anything else. In the previous ones, it just kind of like they altered a little bit, or the guy looks a little uglier, or whatever the case may be. But here it's like no, flat out, he becomes Cro-Magnon man. He's an ape man pretty much. But the transition scenes are really good, and I didn't realize this at the time. I assumed it just transitions. Kind of like when the Wolfman later on in the 40s, when he would kind of go from little bit of hair, then a little bit more hair, and you see him finally grow it all out. That they just kept shooting it, and then they transition to the next shot and the next shot, and it's effective. It works. I assume is what it was here, but it wasn't. What they did was they had a special kind of makeup, and since the movie's black and white, they used very colorful makeup, and so it was layered in certain ways. So what they did was when they shot it, the lights they used, they had different colored gels they put on the lights. So, when you shoot it one way, your face would look one way. And then, of course, they put a different gel on there, and it would highlight these other colors, looking like your face is transforming. And that's how they did it. And I think that's fucking brilliant, because it really is a really cool, I didn't know it when I was watching it, but I was like, that's a really cool, way to do the transformation scene, So yeah, definitely pretty sweet right there. So Frederick March got the job because initially they wanted to have John Barrymore, who did it in the 20s, and they wanted him to reprise the role. But unfortunately, fortunately, I guess however you look at it, he was doing a different movie, couldn't do it, and so Frederick March was brought in. And I guess Frederick March, John Barrymore did a play. And Frederick March did the same play, playing the John Barrymore part, and they're just like, well, hey, he's a good substitute for John Barrymore. We'll just give it to him, and then he would go on to play the role here. It's funny because I've read a lot. Like, this is considered like the version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and and I'll go into my review about a little bit later. But this is what everybody like their version of it, and it. I agree. I agree with it. However, they would remake it again like the next decade, I believe. I think it's like 41, 42. But they had Spencer Tracy in it, and that one just wasn't quite as well received or whatever. And a lot of people blame Spencer Tracy or whatever. I haven't seen it. I'm sure we'll cover it on this show. So when the time comes, we'll get to it. But Frederick March did so well. I mean, he actually won the Academy Award. Which is the first time in history that a horror film has won an Academy Award. Which again, this big new boom of these horror films, getting a lot of credibility, a lot of credence. And every review that came out, everybody loved this movie, but the one thing they all said was Frederick March. It was him. It was all about this guy. This thing currently has a 7.6 on IMDb, 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, and back in the day, it actually grossed $11.3 million, making it a huge hit for Paramount. For my actual review, I'll be honest with you, the first 10 to 20 minutes I felt was very rough. The story, we've seen it already. I forget how many we've covered on here already. We've covered at least 4 three to four easily. And so it was just like, again, we're doing this again. And so I couldn't get into it. I didn't think there was anything special about this Frederick March. Even when he first turns, I'm still not feeling it. And I'll be honest with you, I think I kind of like John Barrymore a little bit better, although I like the look of Frederick March. But I think performance-wise, but again, I mean, it's the first time we're hearing him talk, so I mean, maybe I'm being unfair. John Barrymore's was a silent, performance, but either way, but once the story gets going, I'm hooked. Like this edition of Ivy, I think really gave this a shot in the arm that the original three or four, five, however many. Because I know there's a few of them were shorts that we didn't cover on here. A few of them were lost. So I mean, at this point, who knows how many times this thing has been redone. I wouldn't be exaggerating by saying that, maybe 10 times already. This has been already adapted to screen, but no, I mean, again, I think this whole Ivy thing, it just felt so much darker and sinister. Like the way he treats her. At one point, he's trying, like he knows everything that Jekyll knows. So whenever she's trying to confide in Jekyll, because again, even though Jekyll's trying to be the good guy, he's tempted. He kind of has this spot in his heart for her, and he's even kind of neglecting his fiance, which honestly I don't blame him. I forget the actress who plays Ivy, but goddamn, for 1931, yeah, she's pretty fucking hot, and the fact that she's overtly sexual throughout, it's like, yeah, I can see exactly why you would want to leave the fight, the fiance for her, but she's so helpless. Like every time, he beats her, he whips her, he paddles her, whatever, and then it's implied. I mean, they don't come out and show it obviously, but it's like, yeah, he's raping her as well. Like there's no doubt in my mind, and so she becomes a very sympathetic character throughout all this, and so yeah, it hit a lot darker. And I gotta admit, it's not that. Trying to word this without coming off sound like a complete creep or sleazebag. It's not that you have to have those elements to make a great movie. It's those elements though that make you feel like it does give you this sucker punch right in your soul. And movies that can make you feel on any level, whether it's happiness, sadness, anger, disgust, whatever. That's a good thing. And honestly, that's what this kind of it made me go, wow, this is like you feel bad for Ivy, you really do. I know Jekyll's always kind of like the sympathetic character, and I just don't give a fuck about Jekyll. Like fuck you, you're a pussy. You can you can balance it out. Everything's good in moderation, right? You can be a bit of a dickhead Cro-Magnon man if you want, on the side, but still be, intellectual and a gentleman on the other side. You can balance that shit out, but like Ivy has no chance here. And yeah, I mean, the stuff he does to her is just brutal. The way he talks to her, the way he's trying to trap her and set her up, and just verbally, you just see the fear on her face. Like it's really well done. So yeah, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In all honesty, I can't speak for the Academy. For me personally, this may be my favorite movie from 1931, horror film, or otherwise, really. I think it's really well done. Again, it has a very slow start for me, but once it gets going, it picks up. And honestly, I think I'd like to see it again at some point, just so I can once I kind of know what to expect from the beginning, knowing where it's going to go, maybe I'll enjoy it even more. But yeah, number 4, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Taking a drink. So up next, we're getting into some territory now. Like now we're going to get into, I don't know, maybe you guys are going to think when you see the final list of the 5 that we're talking about tonight, you're going to think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's even down too low. And I'd agree with you. But the movie that does go over at number 1, we'll get there. We'll fucking get there. All right. So at number 3, the Bronze Skull winner of 1931. What is the number 3 horror film? Dracula. We know the story right now. It's, Count Dracula, tricks his accountant to, get him inside London. And once he's there, he's just running amok. He's, targeting women. He's going to drain them of their blood. All that good stuff. So right off the bat, this is the very first talkie version of Dracula. In fact, I think it's the second version that's been out there, because we all know about Nosferatu and how people basically didn't get the rights, the clearance for that, and yeah, they changed enough, but they didn't change a lot. So anyways, Nosferatu was for a while they were trying to ban it and just completely destroy it, all copies of it. So Universal decided to go a legitimate way with it. Like, we're going to make Dracula legitimately. We bought the rights. We're going to put it out there, and they really wanted to. They've been making a slew of like. Again, they're horror films, but to them they were like these event epics, these dramatic. I'm looking for a word. These event films they've been making, something on par with like The Hunchback of Notre Dame or The Phantom of the Opera, something like that. They've been making these big tentpole movies, these dark dramas, but epically, and so they wanted to make Dracula in the same vein as that. And at this point, Dracula was already a stage play. In fact, Bela Lugosi was already Dracula for however many years it was running. So he was already kind of the stage version of Dracula at this point. But they were wanting to do this, and initially they had Todd Browning was going to direct, and they had Lon Chaney locked in for Dracula, and another one of those big what ifs, like what would it have been like if Lon Chaney would have actually been Count Dracula. Unfortunately, he would pass away 2 years prior to the release of this film, and very sad for the not just the horror community, but just the acting community in general. Like, he was just a great performer, and to my knowledge, because again I haven't been looking, so I don't know, but I don't know if did he ever make a talking film, because all the films I've seen of Lon Chaney so far have all been silent. So yeah, I don't know, if he's done anything out there right now that is a talkie, film or whatever. So I don't know how that transition would have been, but I don't know. I'd be willing to give it a shot. I think, I don't know. However, with that said, and the weird thing was the studio did not want to cast Bela Lugosi. Like, they had like a list, like a massive list of people they wanted to put in there instead. But Lugosi, he fought for it, and even was willing to take like a ridiculous pay cut to do it. And so, yeah, again, I'm not sure what the reason for that is. It's like, did you guys not go to the stage play and see what he can do? But I don't know if it was just name recognition. They wanted someone bigger for the role, and at this point, Bela Lugosi was an unknown commodity when it came to film. But either way, Bela Lugosi finally gets it. And rounding out the cast, I think the other two. There's more to it, obviously, but the two that really stand out, you got Edward Van Sloan, who was Van Helsing. He also played Van Helsing on the stage play as well. And then you got Dwight Frye, who plays Renfield. And he gives like an insane fucking performance here. It's just brilliant. So, anyways, the cast was set, and of course with Todd Browning directing. However, it's been said, and I'll talk about this a little bit later when I give my review, but they said like Todd Browning just wasn't, his heart was not into this movie at all, the guys, like the rest of the cast really wasn't into it. Like it's not that they weren't into it, they weren't taking it as serious. Like, the only person on this set taking it seriously was like Bela Lugosi. Like, he's the only one who's just like giving a fuck, and it shows. Like, he does a great job. Take a quick drink. Thank you. And so, it's said that, Todd Browning kind of, I don't know, kind of softballed it in there. You just kind of, I don't know, he was just kind of sleepwalking, directing this thing. All the while, and I forget who it was they said, but, it's been said that others were kind of stepping in for him, I guess, for a lot of this, but I don't know. Is what it is. However, this movie would basically get Bela Lugosi typecast. He after this, he became Count Dracula. To this day, when you think of Dracula, and it don't matter which version you like, you may, once again, I know with these old black and white movies, people today don't really like black and white. I get that. Maybe you prefer the Francis Ford Coppola, Dracula movie. Maybe you prefer fucking Hammer, Christopher Lee, Dracula movie, or maybe you're just into like Dracula Untold or all kinds of new fucking stupid fucking vampire movies. I don't know, but when you think of Dracula, you think of Bela Lugosi. However, this was kind of in his eyes, which I don't know. I guess I never been typecast for anything except for a fat fuck doing podcasts, but like literally, that would be a blessing, I would think. But he did not want to be known as Dracula. In fact, after this was done, he only returned to the role maybe once. I think, for like a TV show, or he did one of the maybe I'll be honest, I hate to say this is a black spot on my resume here, but I have not seen the Abbott and Costello Meet the Monsters, movies. Maybe he reprised it for one of those or something like that. But he quit doing the play and did not want to come back for Dracula in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, he just kind of grew to resent this role more and more. Um, the other thing is, and they wanted this movie was like the first kind of out and out horror film that Universal has done. Because again, their other movies have more of a adventure or even romance, considering what the plot would be. None of them were really just out and out horror. And even like the Cat and the Canary was had a good amount of comedy thrown in there as well. And this one they actually cut a lot of I guess in the initial thing, and we'll talk about another version of this later on. Spoiler alert, sorry. But, there's a bit of comedy that was initially in the original draft of these scripts that were taken out by Todd. So, this was just straight up, uh, you know, a horror. So, anyways, when this thing finally did come out, it was a huge success. I mean, it literally was like horror has arrived in Hollywood. And once again, based on this, everybody started making horror films. Reviews were, the reviews themselves were overall pretty good, but I think it was more the crowd loved it more than, the actual, reviewers or critics at the time. Again, this made Bela Lugosi a household name, made him iconic. It was, just fucking, put him to the moon. However, the one thing a lot of critics said at the time was that the direction was a bit flat. And it is. Like, it's just it's static. It's just... I just kind of bitched about the Phantom being really bad, and this one literally, I mean, it's not much better. I mean, you got a few camera movements here and there, but for the most part, it's just, I don't know. Just doesn't do it for me, which I think maybe the Academy agreed, because that's why it is at number 3. I just, I'll get to my review a little bit later. We'll get to that. Sorry. We'll keep moving along with the story here. With this movie, again, the Hays Code was later, when it was get re-released, they deleted 2 scenes from, or one scene and one sound, I guess I should say, from this movie. Initially, they had this whole epilogue where Van Helsing would come out and, basically talk to you and be like, just so watch the shadows, because you just don't know if there's a vampire there, or, something along those lines. And they didn't want to promote the fact that vampires could be real, even as ridiculous as that sounds. The Hays people were just like, no, we can't have that. Cut it. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, that footage has been lost, or it's been it's too old, too damaged. I don't know what the real story is, but either way, it's never been put back into the film in any version. The other thing was, whenever the Count gets staked, we don't see it. It happens off screen, but I guess spoiler alert. Sorry. In the end, when he gets staked. He groans. It's a death groan. And they didn't like that. And so they took that out as well. And so for the longest time, if you watch Dracula either in the theater or on TV later on, that was just complete silence there. And it wasn't until either the 90s or maybe even the early 2000s. I want to say 90s when it was on VHS. They actually reinserted the groan into it, so you get to hear Dracula die, off stage or off screen. Sorry. So there were actually 3 versions of this movie to come out. As far as like the actual this Dracula, this version came out, and then they actually released it without sound, with intertitles thrown in there, because there were still some theaters who couldn't show talking movies. They didn't have the equipment, the speakers, I guess, hooked up. And so I guess, in your smaller towns, you still had silent theaters at this point. And so they wanted to make sure they covered their bases, and they would go ahead and be like, hey, there you go. Here's Dracula. And it was, silent. I don't know if any of these versions even exist anymore. I don't think they do. So, but again, why would you want to watch a silent version when you have the talkie version? And it's a good, talkie version. But the other thing is, they had a Spanish language version. And so the idea then was they wanted to ship these around the world, but at the time, I guess they didn't think about it, but they're just like, well, we want people to understand what's happening in these. And so they wanted, and once again, it was easier to do in the silent era because you could have the subtitles on there or whatever. And, it was no big deal. You can change the intertitles to fit whatever language or country you're going to. But with the talking era, they didn't quite figure that out yet, so they were trying to figure out what to do. And so Universal would actually release, I think that year alone, or maybe 30 and 31, but either way, they did like 3 or 4 movies where they actually shot it the same sets, same scripts, but with a Spanish-speaking crowd, because their thought was like, we'll go to these markets with a movie in their language by their actors or whatever, and it wouldn't be as expensive because, again, and it sounds bad, but you didn't have to pay the Spanish actors as much as you did the English-speaking actors, and then you did this, if they shot during the day, you would shoot the Spanish version at night. So you would get your production and all that shit taken care of in the same, work day, and you wouldn't have to worry about tearing down sets or building new sets for these people. And so, anyways, the Spanish language came out, but then it, didn't do as well at all. Like none of the versions did, and it didn't really get a big box office return in Los Angeles. Because at that time there was a lot of Spanish speaking people there, and they didn't even bother watching it. So I don't know exactly when it happened, but they decided like, hey, we can change the audio and dub it, and I guess that kind of became the innovation later on. So they were just like, oh yeah, fuck it, we can just do voiceover and won't be a big deal. And so that was that. Dracula would not only would it spawn its own sequels, Daughter of Dracula, Son of Dracula. It also branch off into the Universal MonsterVerse. You'd have House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein. He was in that. I can't remember. I don't think he was in Werewolf meets the or Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. I don't think he was in that one. But Dracula, again, was a staple in the Universal, horror films from here on out. Again, always played by someone else though, because fucking Bela Lugosi's like, I'm too good for that. It's like, no, you really wasn't. I'm sorry to say, but you wasn't. Take a drink. Sorry, chugged it. So, for my personal opinion, when I watched this movie for the first time, you gotta understand, I've already seen so many versions of Dracula. It's the same review I kind of gave when I, said I watched Nosferatu, where, I know the story by heart. I've seen TV adaptations. I've seen, at that point, Francis Ford Coppola. I've seen, I've even seen, like, Dracula Dead and Loving It. Like, I know the story by goddamn heart. And so, it just comes off boring. And when you're watching it, especially this version, the direction is a thing. Like, it is just like, shit, this is boring and slow paced, and I don't know. And I get it, they didn't have the they didn't have special effects really back then. So like every time they would talk about something, it's always off camera. Look out there. There's they're the children of the night. They're wonderful music they make, and it's like, look at the werewolves out there. At one point, he even turns into a wolf and runs across the lawn. We're not seeing that at all. We're hearing everybody else go, hey, look, Dracula just turned to a bat or turned to a wolf, and he turned into the mist and whatever, and he just ran across there. It's like, we didn't see that shit. And I get it, I get it. Where I do give this movie credit, obviously, Bela Lugosi. I mean, he kills it. He fucking kills it as Dracula. He is Dracula. No matter how many people we see, don the cape and put in the fangs, there's only going to be one Dracula, and that is Bela Lugosi. This movie itself, it was given a 7.4 on IMDb, and it currently has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. And it's an integral part of horror movie, history. So I'm not taking anything away from it there. Just on a personal level, it's not a movie I would watch probably again. Or if I do one more time, and that'd be it. It's not a movie I would return to very often at all. But that's just my opinion. So there you have it, number 3, Dracula. Okay, I'm nervous. I'm getting sweaty now because I know this is the movie that people are going to say should be number 1. And I just got into saying I think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde should be number 1. I would say this is probably a solid 2, possibly. Well, it's where it's at, yeah. I think number 1 belongs in the top 3, but we're getting there. I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic. Quit trying to be foreboding with my foreshadowing here. All right, what was the number 2 horror film of 1931 and the winner of the Silver Skull Award? Frankenstein. I know, I hear you booing right now. I can hear you booing. Yeah, you're turning the podcast off right now. You're just like, fuck this. That's the number one. I get it. I fucking get it. We all know the story, Dr. Frankenstein, he's trying to create life where there was none. And so he gets a bunch of useless body parts, stitches them together, and he creates life. Again, once Dracula hit the screens, they were off to the races. And so right off the bat, more horror, more horror. And like I said, Paramount came out with, theirs, and Poverty Row came out with a poor excuse with the Phantom. But Universal was like, we got more. And so they hit, same year, Frankenstein. It's funny because when this, once the movie came out, Bela Lugosi, he really wanted to play the Doctor. He wants to be, Dr. Frankenstein, and was kind of expecting to get that part, after, again, he kind of made money for him. But again, he wasn't, I mean, I don't know what the deal was, if he was like under contract with Universal, or if he was just, again, kind of getting paid just weekly, more of a contract player, I guess you'd say. Not really a full-time member of the staff. And so they quickly, they wanted to use the fact that he was a monster in the last movie, parlay that over here, and they want him to play the monster. And he refused. Now, there's been multiple stories over the years as to why he refused. The story that was always going around initially was like, he wanted to play the Doctor for one. He wanted to, show his acting, chops off. He wanted, you to see his face. And so the fact that he was going to be in the makeup, the brilliant makeup by Jack Pierce, he was that was beneath him. He was above it, and so he flat out refused. Now a story comes out years later that it wasn't that necessarily. It was more like the script sucked, and apparently this is somewhat true because when they do bring in James Wells to direct this movie, he was just like, yeah, this script sucks, and we're rewriting it. And so it was rewritten right there on the spot. So again, who knows the truth? Maybe it's a little bit from both. Again, I feel like, they definitely kind of did him a little dirty. I'm not saying they should have just gave in, but could you imagine if he would have been Dr. Frankenstein and then Boris Karloff would have been the monster? Like, that would have been fucking tight. Like, that would have been, it would have been so badass. I know Colin Clive, or Clive Colin, whatever the fuck his name is. He does great as Frankenstein. I'm not saying he doesn't, but it's like, we could have had like this all-star duo. But it is what it is. So either way, when he doesn't get what he wants, Bela Lugosi quits. And so they bring in James Wells, and they rewrite the whole script, and then that's when they bring in Boris Karloff. The crew here, I'm sorry I don't have the names, but I've mentioned in the previous episodes, guys like the set designers for, Cat and the Canary, Family Opera, a lot of people who did different, costume design or whatever, like all these bit pieces, or these, people who, added a little bit here, a little bit there to other horror films, came together on Frankenstein. So it really was like this all-star kind of thing. And even if, like, at this point Boris Karloff is an unknown, he is like Bela Lugosi, previously with Dracula, he's about to, knock it out of the fucking park. So, but we also get, as on the acting side, I mentioned already, Colin Clive, and, we got a few other guys that would return later on in other horror films. But the one that really stands out to me is you get Dwight Fry, who was Renfield in the last one, and here he's the equally kind of insane Fritz. Which, again, I always forget he's Fritz. I want to call him Igor or Igor, depending on which version you're watching, I guess. But I always forget that Igor doesn't show up until much later, and it's played by Bela Lugosi of all people. So it's Fritz. I just forget it. Sorry. But either way, he puts in a hell of a performance. And then you have like I said, Jack Pierce doing the makeup. You had. I had to research this guy. I didn't know who this guy was, but they had a guy named Kenneth Strickfaden. He apparently did like these lightning effects on the set and kind of invented his own little lightning, Jacob's ladder looking thing. So he became, very well known for that, and he would push this on in further movies or whatever. So he kind of invented they were like called like strict fading sticks or whatever, they called him, he actually, like, his name is still on that to this day. Like, when people use stuff like that, it's his work, so so with the old director, and I forget that guy's name, He wasn't no James Well, I'll tell you that. Him and Lugosi, when they walked and decided like we're done or whatever, they were kind of given the Murders of the Rue Morgue as kind of a consolation prize. That's one I haven't seen yet either. I'm sure I'll cover it, with this podcast. But yeah, I haven't seen that yet. But again, it was no. I mean, again, I don't know how well it did. I don't know my research about it, but I mean, it was definitely no Frankenstein or Dracula. So again, it's the first step where you hear this a lot. Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi at this stage in their career, they're both just top stars. But as time would go on, Boris Karloff's star was always a little bit brighter than Bela Lugosi's, and this is kind of the first step of that, where we start seeing Bela Lugosi not get the top billing and slide down the card a little bit, if you will. And here's, I guess, the first example of that. Yes, so I mentioned earlier about the Hays Code, and yeah, this one had a couple of major changes that were taken out initially. They would both be put back in later on. You couldn't be blasphemous on these things, and there's a line, and I'm paraphrasing. I'm sorry. This is one. I mean, you're gonna like the movie, but I don't know it by heart like I would other horror films later down the road. But paraphrasing. Whenever he's talking about, he knows what it's like to be a god, be like a god, or be whatever, and they didn't like that. So that line was stricken, completely from the thing, because again, can't be blasphemous. And then, of course, when Frankenstein throws the little girl in the water, they had to cut that out. They didn't want to show a child, and you don't really see her drown. You just see her get thrown in the water, and then it just cuts. Here, they just cut it out completely. But I think it's kind of funny because a lot of people have said, like, when you cut her getting thrown in the water out, and they, later on, her father's carrying her dead body back into the village, it's like, that's way worse. Like, what did that monster do to that little girl? Fuck me. And so I just think it's kind of funny, like, in a way, they're trying to censor this little girl getting killed, but maybe, it turned out way worse than it was supposed to be. So, either way, just like Dracula, Frankenstein was a massive hit and also spawned, not only a star in Boris Karloff, but it also spawned many sequels. Boris Karloff come back for most of them as the monster, and then later he would be the actual doctor, as well. And yeah, unlike Dracula, whereas Dracula resented being Bela Lugosi resented being Dracula, Boris Karloff, he loved being Frankenstein. He loved being known, the Frankenstein's monster. He loved being the monster. He just loved acting, and he was just thrilled, even if he was going to be known as a horror guy. He never felt above it. He felt blessed to be, working and just being beloved by an entire community of people. And something that, Bela Lugosi just never could bring himself to. And I think, that's why Boris Karloff got better breaks later down the road, or at least one of the reasons, I would say. In fact, the only reason he stopped playing the monster wasn't necessarily because he didn't want to play it anymore. It's because the makeup and the outfit was so big. And at this point, he was a late bloomer in Hollywood. Like, he didn't get famous until he was like in his mid to late 30s, maybe even 40s. So like at this point, like, he's developing like back problems or whatever. And there's rumors that like James Well's a bit of a dick to him. I don't know why. And again, this could just be rumors. So if I'm wrong, you can correct me and tell me in the comment section. But the rumor was like he was a dick to him. And, like, would make him carry bodies up a hill and everything. Like, he's carrying Dr. Frankenstein up a hill, and he just make him do it over and over and over. So, either way, it would eventually end up hurting his back pretty bad. And, yeah, he never did quite recover from that. He always had, back pains up until the very end. But, again, he didn't stop because of, not wanting to play the monster. He had to stop because he physically just couldn't do it anymore. This film has a 7.8 on IMDb, 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes, and this thing grossed $12 million at the box office, which again, 1931, god damn, just killing it. Box office kaboom. So doing great. For me personally, I think this is an easier watch than Dracula. But again, it's one of those that I kind of know the story already going into it, and that does kind of, I think the sequels are better. I think Bride of Frankenstein, much better. And then I think even the Son of Dracula, the Son of Frankenstein is better. Or no, Ghost. Sorry, Ghost of Frankenstein. Whichever one that had the 31 and 39 that had Karloff playing the final one. Either way, much better. And then, like I said, the character I always loved. I think honestly, my favorite Universal monster is the monster, Frankenstein's monster, because I don't know. He was the original Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers. Like, you couldn't kill this guy, no matter what you did. Throw him into a fire pit, throw him into a well, icy water, freezing him up. He just found a way to come back every time, and it's like he's like the first zombie kind of. He technically was. I mean, the first reanimated corpse, in cinema history. And so no, I mean, like I said, I guess is better shot, better acted. It looks, once again, it's a easier watch to me than Dracula, but again, it's just such a story that we already know. I think anybody who's never even seen Frankenstein or a Frankenstein would pretty much know where the story's going. Like it's I don't know. It is what it is. But no, yeah, Frankenstein. And it goes without saying it's better than the 1910 version we covered on here. Way back in we call that season one. I don't know if we had season or not, but the first few episodes we did, we covered Frankenstein, and yeah, this definitely is better than that. So there you go, number 2 film, Frankenstein. We're moving on to number 1. I just know I'm getting shit for this one. Should have told you I take a drink. Sorry. That's a drinking game for you guys at home. We're not taking a drink. You guys take a drink. How about that? So, what is the number 1 horror film of 1931? Winner of the Golden Skull Award, Dracula. And I'm talking about the Spanish language Dracula. Yes, send your hate tweets to us. Send all your hate mail to us. I get it. I get it. Okay? Probably you guys are right. Credibility may have been lost in the Academy at this point, but let's explain. So Dracula, we know the story. Vampire going after the girl, and yeah. So again, I mentioned previously, so I won't go back into why the movie's made. But the thing was, the benefit of doing it the way they did it, and it certainly benefited this version of the movie, because I think this is the only one that people will say, like, from a filmmaking standpoint, this is better than the English version of Dracula. I don't think the other 2 or 3 films they did at Universal this way, I don't think anybody says that about them. But with this one, what the director did was he would come in early and he would watch the dailies of what they did and then just make it better. Because, again, Todd Bryan wasn't trying, and, lots of just boring shots. And so, and again, the producers weren't really looking after him as much. So this version was actually a little bit longer, had the comedy kind of thrown back in, and it has that visual flair. Like I said, the directing is just so much better. And I think it does enhance it to a certain degree. Not as that, but my God, they get the girl. That's the one thing everybody talks about. Whenever I saw the special features of this, they had a whole thing about it, and everything I've been reading, retrospectively, of course, that the lead actress and her low cut top for 1931. It's like, dude, she had the tits. I mean, that's just all there is to it. That Spanish girl had the tits. Shake 'em, mamacita, shake 'em. So again, it had the visual quality over it. From directing, it was way better. I think the pacing's even better. The one thing I will say this doesn't have, and I completely admit, it doesn't have Bela Lugosi. I forget the guy's name, Carlos Villanueva or it's Bella something. Yeah, I mean he's no Count Dracula. I'm sorry, like at all. And there's no comparison. You just kind of wish that this director was doing the original one, and they maybe just swapped girls out. And I've been okay with who was she there? Nina, not Nina, the other one. Doesn't matter. Definitely would have much rather had the Hispanic version of that. But no, unfortunately though, this movie flopped when it came out because again, nobody wanted to see it. Everybody wanted to see the English version of it. It didn't draw a huge Spanish crowd like they thought it would. However, it would get kind of rediscovered years later, like I want to say like 70s or 80s maybe. People were watching it, and I want to say actually there was versions of it floating around, but like I want to say it was like rediscovered like in Cuba of all places, which I'm like that's so weird because like weren't we like against Cuba during this time frame? So I don't know. Either way, though, they were able to get the sound and everything, and re-release it with subtitles, of course. And yeah, people were able to kind of not just rediscover, it, but kind of appreciate it for what it is. It's one of those things where you know if you're looking for just, I guess, if you're clearly not into subtitled movies or whatever, which is a shame, you really, shouldn't close yourself off like that. But I feel like, if you really want to see a different take on the material and a different look, essentially, yeah, definitely check out the new Dracula. For me personally, I do like this one. It was in my, they released a box set of Dracula. It had it had like 4 or 5 movies in it. It was Daughter of Dracula. They had both Draculas, and they had Daughter of Dracula, and I want to say like probably House of Dracula, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe another one. I don't remember, but either way. And so I watched all those first. I didn't watch the Spanish one until later because I was like, well, there's no continuity between this and the other movies, so I can just kind of take my own time on that. And I really wasn't looking forward to it because, again, I just got on watching the American version of Dracula, which is just dull and boring and slow. And so whenever I popped it in with no preconcept, I mean, I didn't read this stuff. I didn't know about, what other people thought about this. It did kind of blow me away. I was like, holy shit, like it is a much better film. And I would rewatch it later on. And again, it was like, damn, like this is actually just better than the English version. And again, I'm not taking nothing away from Bela Lugosi. He is fucking Dracula, but it's a movie. I gotta agree with the Academy on this one. This one's just better. This has a 7.1 on IMDb and 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Suck it, English version Dracula. So there you have it. And again, you guys, I mean, don't completely hate on us. Give us your feedback. What do you think? The top 5. How would you rank these films? If you were to rank them. Like I said, I'm sure Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde be a lot higher. I'm sure the English Dracula may be higher, and this would be, either 4 or 5. But, I stand by the Academy. I don't always agree with them, but I will stand by them. Dracula is the #1 horror film of 1931. But not Dracula, but, the Spanish version. So, to just recap real quickly where we're at as we close out this week, or look back at 1931 in the world of horror. Dante Alighieri, I know I'm killing that name, was inducted into our Hall of Fame, our Horror Hall of Fame. At number 5, The Phantom. Number 4, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. At number 3, and winner of the Bronze Skull Award, the English version of Dracula. At number 2, winner of the Silver Skull Award, Frankenstein. And number 1, winner of the Golden Skull Award, the Spanish language version of Dracula. So everybody, I hope you enjoyed this look back at 1931 in the world of horror. Let us know what you think. Thank you for joining us. My name has been Daniel Richardson on behalf of the Retro Horror Academy, and you're dismissed.